would like to make a statement about the events at Glastonbury this weekend. Members of Parliament will have seen, as I have, the appalling and unacceptable scenes at Glastonbury on Saturday, where chants of death to the IDF and river to the sea, amongst others, were broadcast to the nation. I've been in touch with my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, as to whether there has been any criminal offence committed. The House will know that decisions relating to specific cases are an operational matter for the police. Avon and Somerset Police have confirmed that video evidence is being assessed by officers to determine whether any offences may have been committed. They have just announced in the last few minutes that this has now taken the form of a criminal investigation. So, as I hope members will appreciate, it therefore would not be appropriate for the government to comment on an ongoing investigation at this stage. But let me be clear that this government will not tolerate anti-Semitism. It has no place in our society. It is a poison and a cancer that must be rooted out, and we will be relentless in our work to do so. This government works closely with the police and with community partners to ensure the safety and security of Jewish communities, and we will continue to do so following the enormous impact that these events have had on them over the weekend. Let me turn now to the role of the BBC. On Saturday afternoon, just after the broadcast, I called the Director General to ask for an explanation and what immediate steps the BBC leadership intended to take. As the Prime Minister said yesterday, it is essential that the BBC explains how these scenes came to be broadcast. The BBC has rightly apologised and took the immediate decision not to put this content on iPlayer. I welcome that. However, key outstanding questions remain, including why this performance was broadcast live, given the concerns regarding other acts in the weeks preceding the festival, why the feed wasn't immediately cut when the chants of death to the IDF began, and what due diligence was done prior to the decision to broadcast this particular act to the nation. I expect answers to these questions without delay. I have made that view clear to the BBC leadership, and I will, of course, update the House as soon as I can. Over the weekend and this morning, I have also had conversations with members of the Jewish community, including those who were present at Glastonbury. They have raised a number of concerns about imagery and slogans that were on display at the festival this weekend. And I am told that this led them to establish their own safe space at the festival. As a government, we take this incredibly seriously. We are urgently looking into the specifics of these alarming reports and reaching out to the festival organisers. Finally, I want to be clear about the government's role. As a government, we strongly support freedom of expression, and as Culture Secretary, I will robustly defend the independence of our broadcasters and the right to artistic expression. But we do not accept that incitement to violence, hate speech or anti-Semitism is art. There is a clear difference between speaking out for Palestine, which is the right of everybody in this House and everybody in our country, and anti-Semitism, which is not and which will never be. When the rights and safety of people and communities are at risk, and when our national broadcaster fails to uphold its own standards, we will intervene. In the coming days, I will be having further conversations with the BBC and festival organisers to ensure that lessons are learnt and action is taken. And I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State, Stuart Andrew.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the Secretary of State for her statement and for advance sight of it, and for her tone. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have always been a strong advocate for the BBC. It is a cornerstone of British public life with a proud history of cultural contribution. The events of this weekend, however, have made this incredibly difficult. During the coverage of the festival, the artist, as we've heard, real name Pascal Robinson Foster, led the crowd in a chant of death to the IDF, a moment which extraordinarily was transmitted by the BBC. Let me be clear, a national broadcaster funded by the licence payers must adhere to the highest standards of impartiality, responsibility and commitment to social cohesion. And I hope we can all agree that in this instance it has failed profoundly. Free speech and political activism are the sign of a healthy democracy, essential to it. But when you cross the line to incitement to violence, then there must be a consequence. However, broadcasting is not a passive act. Every second of broadcast transmitted is an active choice. Airing Robinson Foster's hateful rhetoric wasn't just a lapse in editorial judgment. It was a disgraceful affront to the Jewish community and a violation of the BBC's own public charter, and to entertain without undermining the fundamental values of our society. As the Secretary of State said, let us be clear that hateful rhetoric should never be cloaked as artistic expression. But it also raises fundamental questions about the BBC's institutional culture. This is a broadcaster that has time and again given airtime to representatives and supporters of Hamas while refusing to clearly identify the group as what it is, a terrorist organisation. It has repeatedly failed to call out anti-Semitic rhetoric when it emerges under the guise of political commentary, and has faced serious allegations of minimising attacks on Jewish communities. The BBC's decision to also broadcast material from KNEECAP, a group whose members have openly called for members of Parliament to be killed, is as indefensible as it is shocking. We have already seen the devastating consequences of political violence in this country, with the loss and the tragic murder of Joe Cox and Sir David Amess. For the BBC to amplify voices advocating similar violence is grossly irresponsible. Even more troubling is that a leading member of the group is currently facing a terrorism charge. That fact alone should have prompted an immediate editorial intervention. Instead, the BBC gave this group a platform on a publicly funded service. I welcome the fact that the Secretary of State has spoken to the Director General, and I'm grateful to her for coming to the House to report on that exchange. However, I would like to press her further to ensure the gravity of this matter is fully recognised. Is she satisfied with the BBC's explanation that they originally decided that streaming the performance was in line with their editorial guidelines, and have now decided they will look at their guidance around live events so they can be sure teams are clear on when it is acceptable to keep output on air? Does she think the BBC's editorial guidelines were not clear enough, or does she think that the BBC misinterpreted them in the first place? And does she think that this sort of weak response will be of cold comfort to the Jewish community? I welcome the fact that she has spoken to the Home Secretary, and I wonder if she could also assess whether the BBC's actions constituted a breach of Section 22 of the Public Order Act. And does she believe the BBC's current editorial oversight mechanisms are adequate, specifically across the commercial broadcasting arms like BBC Studios? And does she think it is still right that the BBC gets to mark its own homework in the first instance before Ofcom get involved, and that an independent inquiry is what is needed? And in light of the repeated failings, will the government commit to a full review of the BBC's impartiality and governance standards as part of the Royal Charter renewal? And can she provide an update to the House on why the Charter renewal framework and Green Paper have not yet been published? Finally, can I thank her for her work so far? She will have the support of this side of the House, and I welcome her commitment to come back to the House to update us.
Thank you. I'm grateful to him, and I think all of those involved in the events of this weekend will hear the very strong feelings across all sides of this House, so I'm grateful to him for that. And I share his view about the importance of the BBC. I would say that those of us who do believe in the importance of our national broadcaster are probably more angry than anybody about what has happened over the last few days. It's precisely because we understand the importance of the BBC that we know that the BBC has to do better. He's asked whether I'm satisfied with the explanation that I've had so far. I'm not. I've been very clear with the BBC leadership about that, and clear that I expect to get a full explanation immediately without delay. He asked about the possibility of an independent inquiry. I would say to all members of this House that I'm not sure that you need an inquiry to establish that it should have been foreseeable that there would be problems with broadcasts this weekend, that the decision to broadcast live without any delay should have been reviewed, and that a live feed should have been pulled immediately when the chants death to the IDF began. So what I want to see from the BBC, and I know he shares this, is rapid action to make sure this cannot happen again. I've promised to update the House on these developments, but I should say too that I am still expecting a response from the BBC about an earlier decision to broadcast a documentary about Gaza, which it was then discovered fell short of the BBC's own editorial standards as well. So I expect a response quickly and swiftly, and I expect action as well. And finally, can I just thank him for mentioning the Jewish community, because having spoken to friends and colleagues across the Jewish community over the weekend, I cannot describe how much this has impacted on them, particularly those members of the Jewish community who were at Glastonbury. I was extremely distressed to hear that there were organisations whose logo was emblazoned very visibly on T-shirts and banners who are about to be prescribed by the government. I was concerned to hear reports that there were images associated with Hamas and others, and Nazi imagery as well. Most people who go to Glastonbury, I think, go for exactly the reasons that I've been in the past, and I suspect he has as well, because music festivals are an incredible way to bring people together, to show support and solidarity, to bind a nation and to showcase great British talent. And it is our job collectively to ensure that those festivals become again and remain a place where everybody in our country is welcome.